Why the upcoming Pokemon Legends ZA has almost all the worst starters in it. But don't worry, it's from a VGC perspective. This isn't a leak or anything like that, but I would like to talk about the starters in Pokemon Legends ZA, which my brother will probably have to get to keep playing Pokemon VGC. I would like to reiterate that these starters are not bad in the cosmetic way. I in fact find Chikorita to be my second favorite grass starter in terms of appearance, behind Bulbasaur. Sadly for Tepig, I do not really have anything nice to say about them, and as for Totodile, I will get to him in a minute. Starting with the classic Pokemon punching bag, I will talk about Chikorita. When I talk about these starters, I'm mostly talking about their third evolution, since that is the form of them that is the most usable. So for this one, I'm really talking about Meganium. So that would mean that I'm also talking about Emboar and Feraligatr, respectively. It is clear as day to a VGC player that Meganium is not really a great Pokemon. The stats suck, the moves suck, and even its abilities suck. Going in order, to explain why Meganium's stats are terrible, one must understand what role a Pokemon is to play when being put into a team. With stats like these, there is an immediate dissonance between the stats and making a decision as such. One can immediately spot that Meganium is a rather haphazardly given a mix attacker's stats. While this may not seem to matter due to the other stats, it is generally bad for a Pokemon to have mixed offensive stats unless the stats are wildly high. With Meganium being a grass type, it would generally be better if the stats skewed towards special, but there are good physical grass moves as well, so either way would have been better, just not mixed. Moving on to the stats that would matter, the defensive stats, there is a different problem that makes the role of this Pokemon harder to parse. The stats are simply too low. With defensive stats like these, it seems as though this Pokemon would be a support Pokemon. The problem is that this Pokemon is not a legendary Pokemon, so much of the stats are muted, and combined with the fact that it's given way too much mixed offensive stats, it makes it not really that usable. Usually Pokemon have to make up for this with a niche moveset or a key ability, those which I have to get into later. The strange skew towards even speed and HP doesn't help this Pokemon with fitting the role of a support Pokemon either. If I were to redo this Pokemon stats to fit a support Pokemon, I would cut attack, special attack, and speed by 20 each, and effectively shift all those stats over by one column, giving them to HP, defense, and special defense. If I wanted to go against the grain and turn this Pokemon into a physical attacker, I would take 43 of the special attack and put it into attack. These changes would not make the Pokemon immediately viable, but either of these changes would make people at least pontificate on adding this Pokemon to their team. Next I have to go on to the moves, which fill out the blank of what role this Pokemon was supposed to play. This Pokemon was clearly intended as a support, but the stats, as I said earlier, are skewed toward a weird, slightly bulky, mixed attacker. Being a support Pokemon comes with the hardship of competing with other support Pokemon. Meganium cannot possibly compete with the likes of Grimmsnarl, Alolan Ninetales, or even Whimsicott. But speaking in terms of the other grass starters, cannot fill the role the other Pokemon starters play based on their combinations of moveset, stats, and abilities. Just to explain how it can't compete with Grimmsnarl or Alolan Ninetales, Grimmsnarl has Prankster, which is a special ability that lets it set up all of these moves at instant speed from the get-go, and it has Dark type, which means that you can't taunt it with the exact same ability. You have to use a low priority taunt to get rid of it. Alolan Ninetales does more than just be support. It can set up the weather to be annoying, and I do have to caveat inside of the moveset part that Meganium gets a special move. Actually, let me double check this. Meganium gets a special move in Leech Seed, but Leech Seed right now is terrible. It's a terrible, terrible ability that doesn't really do much in this format. In fact, every single Scarlet Violet format, I would say it hasn't been super good, except for maybe like really early. And that's because generally it's pivot heavy, the format is. You know? You switch out a bunch and then the Leech Seed just goes away, it doesn't matter. With that out of the way, I will go down the line on the grass starters later, but let me unload on this abomination of an ability pool. I talk about the abilities for Meganium as though there are several options, but Meganium is a starter, and as starters go, they only get 2 abilities. The ordinary ability for Meganium is the usual Overgrow, which is not very good for Meganium. Overgrow and the Fire and Water counterparts are generally not good abilities for starters. Usually these abilities work best when their Pokemon is intended to survive off of Focus Sash. With Meganium not having outstanding amounts of bulk, but being a bulkier Pokemon, Their health will probably not sit around the nearly empty mark that is necessary to activate this ability. This is where I say that the second ability makes up for this, but the developers of this game decided to give Meganium the short end of the stick with the ability Leaf Guard. Yep, Leaf Guard. If you had to look up this ability, you would already know that it is mediocre. It is simply not enough for an ability to reactively remove status conditions under a specific environment. All other grass types got an ability that at least served some niche, which is wild how Meganium got the worst. If you are a Chikorita stan, I would have to batter your heavy heart more by going through the other grass starters and pointing out how they are better, going from second worst to best. At second worst, or at least how I would see it, we have Sceptile, which is also a mixed attacker, and a terrible mixed attacker at that. But, and I'm not including Mega Sceptile, because if we included Mega Sceptile, it would probably be like second best, next to Mega Venusaur. So that's not really fair to judge. I'm not including any kind of transformations, not even G-Max Rillaboom or however you want to put it. But back onto Sceptile. Sceptile, as I said, he's an underwhelming mixed attacker, but he has one of the best abilities for being a fast attacker, which is Unburden. When it comes to filling the niche role of doing what you need to, having Unburden, like, that's really good for being an attacker. Next, I put Decidueye. I do actually include Hisuian Decidueye because it's not really fair. If we were just judging Decidueye itself, I would put Sceptile above Decidueye, because Decidueye's regular ability is unworthy of anything. It's worse than Meganium's, actually. But Decidueye Hisuian makes it get a little bit of a bump, because Hisuian Decidueye has a bit better stats than Sceptile, definitely better stats than Meganium. And people actually tried it, I remember, in the lower power formats, like Regulation H and Regulation, I think it's just H actually. But if we were looking at just Decidueye, the basic one, I would definitely say it's like probably second worst. Otherwise, Hisuian Decidueye, he gets a special move as well. That's not bad either. In 3 arrows, that's a pretty okay move. Post-recording poo-poo here. I'm looking at triple arrows, as I actually misnamed as 3 arrows. And I want to just say, the stuff where they did Hisuian moves, and they made it into like, this Pokemon will either do this or that or this, that needs to never happen again. That stuff is annoying. Fuck Direclop. And of course, because of that, people actually did try it. Next is on to Chestnut. I know it's insane for me to say this, but Chestnut is pretty much a little bit better, I think, than Decidueye. But the thing is, the reason why is because he's got just okay moves, pretty meh stats, but it's not abysmal stats. But more importantly, he has a cool move in Spiky Shield. I think he was the first one of the first ones to have Spiky Shield. He also has an ability that's not terrible in Bulletproof. Bulletproof can cover a lot of moves for some reason. And I do think that this made people also try this Pokemon out. Then next we have Torterra. I put Torterra above Chestnut because I did see a lot more Torterra. And this was entirely because Torterra, during Regulation F, people ran him for some reason because of Shell Armor. Shell Armor doesn't counter Urshifu, but they can't hit crits on you with Shell Armor, which is funny. And I do remember seeing it in Regulation F a lot. Now Serperior, this is where we're actually getting into the really good Pokemon. And I wrote here, where the first 4 Pokemon nearly all tie each other in terms of playability. Serperior is the first where I've seen it get a regional top, actually, in high power formats. And this is because Serperior's hidden ability, Contrary, is just an amazing ability for it to have. What is baffling about this Pokemon, too, is that it actually has a very low amount of special attack to be a special attacker, but it doesn't matter because Contrary makes up for this. Not only that, Serperior has a weird amount of speed and bulk to it. Serperior is a really bulky Pokemon that just gains more offensive stats as you use it. Next up, at the third best one, I have Venusaur. And I want to say that it was hard for me to parse between this one and Serperior, but I think that Venusaur ekes out a bit above Superior because of its more versatile capabilities. People use this on Sun teams really often, like especially early on, because of Chlorophyll and Sleep Powder. It's kind of like a fast sleep Pokemon. Combined with the fact that Venusaur is a little bulky, this makes this Pokemon pretty good. It turns out that the amount of speed a Pokemon needs is just barely enough. Like, Venusaur is not a super fast Pokemon, but having Chlorophyll makes it outspeed a lot of stuff. As a side note, I do not know why people call this Pokemon the worst starter in Red Blue / Fire Red / Leaf Green when it is just so strong even in those games. But then we get on to the top two, starting with Meowscarada. And the first thing I want to say is Power Creep was strong with Scarlet and Violet. So much so that the grass starter of those games, Meowscarada, is almost the strongest starter now. That Pokemon fits the role of being a strong physical attacker, but fits the even more niche role of being a starter that can take advantage of the ordinary starter ability, as I said earlier, Overgrow. With Focus Sash, this Pokemon wreaked havoc on the early Scarlet Violet formats, casting one of the only guaranteed crit attacks in Dondozo format is really strong. Piling on to this, the other ability is not bad either, being able to do stab with any one move once. Just absurd how Meowscarada has two really good abilities. And lastly, you already know who's the top one. Do we even need to talk about it? It's of course Rillaboom. Rillaboom, who's the strongest grass starter. I don't even want to talk about this guy. Do you even know? If you don't know who Rillaboom is, I don't know what to tell you. Rillaboom is just really annoying. You know what the most annoying part is? Okay, this isn't on the script. I'm gonna say this, okay? And I hate this. I hate it. It's with a heavy heart that I have to say this. If Tapu Bulu was legal, people would still use Rillaboom over Tapu Bulu. All this to say that Meganium is just not great in comparison to the other grass starters. It is interesting because if I were to rank the starters all mixed together rather than based on type, as I am with this video, I would easily put Meganium into C tier since it at least can do things, just not that well. And now on to Tepig, which this is going to be the most cruel dog pile ever on Tepig. Sorry if you love Tepig, I'm so sorry. I'm going to go a bit quicker on this one because this one is amazingly boring. I feel really bad for all the Tepig stands out there because Emboar is incredibly bad. This time I want to start with the moves the Pokemon gets. Emboar's move pool is uninspiring. It is just the usual moves that a fire physical attacker would have. Flare Blitz, Close Combat, and the usual other suspects. But as its signature move, it gets Heat Crash. Emboar is not remotely close to being the heaviest Pokemon, making this move lackluster in damage. Koraidon weighs double that of Emboar. I hate to have to say this, but DeviantArt was right for once. This Pokemon needs to be inflated. But that's not all. Moving on to the stats, all one can say is why. Emboar has the same problem as Meganium, but turned up to 11, with this Pokemon's defensive stats completely butchered for a randomly high amount of special attack. But obviously not enough to matter. Even the speed stat of this Pokemon is wrong, with a speed stat that is just a bit too high to be usable in Trick Room. As the Strawberry on top, this Pokemon gets a completely forgettable ability in the form of Reckless. While Reckless at least does something in comparison to Meganium's ability that does nothing, Emboar having such low defenses just means that Flare Blitz is now going to make the Pokemon kill itself faster rather than be an overall improvement. I don't even want to rank this Pokemon among the other fire starters because the other fire starters all blow this Pokemon out of the water. The only ones who can be acknowledged as not a cut above the rest are Infernape, Blaziken, and Cinderace. But this is only because the bar is so high for fire starters, like absurdly high. If I were to put Emboar on that same bar, Emboar would be at least 5 feet under the ground in comparison to those I listed. It is just that bad. So bad I would actually put this Pokemon in F tier if I were to rank every starter. Sad days for Tepig enjoyers. Which brings us to Totodile. Now if you were a Totodile hater, I am afraid you will not be getting a kick out of this part of the video. Totodile is not the worst water starter. In fact, it is rather far from it. That title goes to Inteleon. Inteleon just does not have a good enough move pool for its role it is trying to fulfill. It has the stats that make for a good special attacker, just not the moves to back it up. Snipe Shot with Sniper is not a great thing to rely on, and the base damage of Snipe Shot is not high enough to be interesting. In fact, I would say that Inteleon's move pool is more befitting for a bulkier Pokemon. This Pokemon is like if Politoed had a bit more special attack and speed at the expense of a lot of defense. I would not know how good the G-Max form of this Pokemon was, but I am not examining such a thing with this ranking, just as I had not with Sceptile or Venusaur or Rillaboom. But back to Totodile. Looking through the moves and the stats more thoroughly, I actually realized that Totodile kind of has the sauce. Sheer Force is a completely bullshit ability that skirts the cost of Life Orb and blows things up. To pair with this, Feraligatr is not a mixed attacker, which is great. Where it is lackluster a bit is in the bulk, with a bit too much of it sacrificed for special attack and speed. Other than that, not really any notes for Feraligatr. It is a bit more solid than I thought. As for Inteleon, shame on you for having too much attack. This Pokemon dies in one hit to split damage Glacial Lance. With these explanations, I hope I have outlined just how bad these Pokemons are, with the exception of Totodile. I do not know why two of these Pokemon are from the same region, but I do feel as though outlining why some of them are simply the worst might shed light on why they are being placed in this game in the first place. Mega Evolution that fixes everything about the Pokemon! See you tomorrow for more Minecraft March. Oh yeah, it's Minecraft March.